Football is a universal language. It brings people together irrespective of their culture, nationalities, or their beliefs. This is what George Weah, former president of Liberia and the only African to ever win the Ballon d'Or, said. But recently, I've been thinking, does football really unite us, or does it actually sow divisions further in society? The standard definition of to unite is to bring together separate people, things, or entities to form a singular whole and to work together for a common purpose. And especially in the case of football, we talk about sport positively uniting people together. A stat that we see commonly when the Euros or World Cup come around, and that's the fact that when the England national team play, domestic violence rates spike. It's 28% when they play and then 36% when they lose. Domestic violence in the UK disproportionately affects women, so if we're isolating one gender specifically, we're already creating a problem and division rather than uniting. Another standard intersection that we see football failing to unite, especially in the UK, is race. All we need to do is look back to the 2021 Euros, where we took penalties against Italy and Saka, Rashford and Sancho stepped up to the lines and unfortunately missed their penalties. Within minutes, social media was flooded with racist abuse and racist attacks. This is further reinforced with what we saw last week when a Paraguayan senator racially attacked Kylian Mbappe online, calling him a colonized Cameroonian, saying he was uneducated and likening him to a monkey, which all have insane historical ties and stereotypes linked to them and is unacceptable. This is indicative of how people's racial ideologies are acting as a barrier to sport truly uniting us. And with members of the diaspora playing for so many European countries or across the world for this World Cup, it further reinforces this idea that a black person is only a countryman and they can really only claim the national identity when they're winning and they're succeeding, rather than when they make a mistake or when they fuck up. And this is so indicative of the quote I always see going around, and it's like Benzema saying, when I score I'm French, when I don't I'm Arab. Ozil saying, when we win I'm German, when we lose I'm an immigrant. And with Lukaku saying, when things were going well I was Lukaku, the Belgian striker, and when things weren't I was the Belgian striker of Congolese descent. And this shows again how football isn't necessarily uniting the players and the countries and the team as one. It's instead isolating and picking and choosing when people can be claimed as a national or as a real member of that community or that country, regardless of whether they were born there, raised there, spent their whole life there. That's the only language they speak. And then when we begin to pick and choose who's a real Brit or who's a real German, that's when things get really, really slippery and so dangerous. I know we're talking about football in this video, but we see this in other sports as well. The same with Naomi Osaka not being seen as truly Japanese. Then when she was winning Grand Slams back to back, it was, wow, Naomi Osaka, the Japanese woman. Or we see Colin Kaepernick, who was often hailed as like a homegrown talent, but then when he spoke up for Black Lives Matter and took the knee, he was seen as un-American and not a real part of the country. A graphic I see quite often is a picture of the French national team or the English national team, and it has blacked out all of the people who wouldn't be playing if immigration wasn't a thing or their grandparents hadn't come due to colonization, the Windrush, whatever, and how lucky we should be that immigration is a thing and these people are playing for our national teams. But immigrants aren't only valuable when they're scoring goals for the country. People can be valuable in lots of different levels, and we shouldn't just only think it's okay or the people playing for the national team are one of the good ones, they're acceptable because they're doing something for the bigger country. When you treat your next door neighbor with disrespect because they're an immigrant, but then it's okay for you to be cheering on like Marcus Rashford or Jude Bellingham, it doesn't make sense. Make it make sense. In this World Cup specifically, we've seen xenophobia stop us from uniting throughout football, with Somali referee Omar Atan, who was denied entry into the US, and despite him winning referee of the year last year with the CAF, and he simply couldn't complete his duties due to US immigration and visa rules. This proves as an example of sport not uniting us, because it's essentially saying sport and football and the World Cup is specifically for people who have visa-free access or can acquire a visa to get into the US and complete their job. Despite Omar Atan being entirely qualified, having the right entry requirements, having a diplomatic passport, he couldn't get into the US to complete his job because of the politics of the host nation. And that's insane, because you're essentially excluding a part of the world and specific countries because they don't meet your requirements. But that's not sport uniting us. That's you handpicking and cherry picking which countries you want to be the face of the World Cup and which countries and which referees can be involved in this tournament, which is meant to unite the entire world, but you're excluding a certain group of people, and this group of people is often non-white countries or African countries or Caribbean countries. We've also saw politics have a direct influence on FIFA, with Trump calling and asking FIFA to revoke a US red card, and it happening regardless of the fact there is no precedent for this whatsoever. When a president of a host nation or a political leader has that amount of influence purely to benefit the host nation, that is sowing division, because I'm pissed. There's no way, because you actually think if the president of Uzbekistan called up FIFA and they were like, sick, please can you revoke this red card, that would happen. That is political influence of a Western country taking a massive center stage, and it is something that we would not see for any country outside of the US or maybe a European country or another host nation. There's no way, and that's a massive division of sport. There's no way that's uniting us. On a smaller scale, talking about specific countries, when Uruguay got knocked out of the World Cup so early on, they had their private jet cancelled and they had to fly economy back home to Uruguay. Although we're talking about one specific country, it shows how sport is essentially dividing us when people and athletes don't perform to the level that we thought that they would. It's so isolating for that to be a team. You should be proud of your team for how they performed regardless into making it to the World Cup. So when they get isolated on a scale like this and get privileges revoked from them, it's kind of interesting, and it's like division within a country. It also made me think back to the early 2000s. I saw a story how the Cote d'Ivoire team got detained when they landed back after an AFCON run because they didn't make it out of the group stages. The military who were in charge at the time said it was done for the Cote d'Ivoire's players' own safety and to make sure they didn't get like abused when they were out on the street, but they had their passports and their phones taken away from them, and other spokespersons have said it was due to a punishment and down to the fact that each of the players were paid $8,000 and they didn't perform and they humiliated the country. I feel like I've seen this talked about a lot, but we need to remember that FIFA is not an innocent, benevolent or an independent sport organization at this point, and the fact that the past 3 World Cups have been held in questionable host nations, whether it's the US and their visa issues or the Qatar World Cup being built literally on slave labor, or the Russian World Cup where homophobia and racism was still rife within the country. We see FIFA essentially rewarding nations that don't necessarily deserve it, and how football isn't necessarily uniting us, but it's instead isolating certain members of the footballing world and the footballing community. One thing about FIFA is they're going to be so selective. Russia got banned from the 2022 World Cup due to their escalation on the war in Ukraine, and that's so valid, as it absolutely should be. But then when FIFA haven't condemned Israel for the war crimes and the genocide that they're committing on the Palestinian people, we understand where FIFA's allegiances lie. And we saw this earlier on in the year as well, when Infantino tried to get the president of the Palestinian Football Association to shake hands with the president of the Israeli Football Association. And this is also in addition to suggesting that the Palestine under-15 team played the Israeli team as well. And he's saying all of this whilst football games are being played on occupied land and territory, and Israel have been responsible for killing multiple Palestinian athletes and football players in the past years. It's so insulting for Infantino to use this as a guise of promoting peace without acknowledging the horrors that Israel are carrying on the Palestinian people. And this is why football and politics are so inherently political, and when we have people who are in charge of federations not acknowledging this, it further sows division and doesn't act as a tool of unity whatsoever. We also see corporations make a wildly misinterpreted attempt of uniting people through sport. For example, Sky Sports launched their Halo channel earlier on in the year, and it was essentially a pink social media page dedicated to getting women into sports and increasing their viewership. It was so beyond insulting, and they were basically suggesting that women had no in-depth knowledge of sport, and the only way they could interact with the sporting community and sport in general is through TikTok trends and having a little sweet treat matcha and linking that somehow to football and having football playing in the background, having it all pink. It was such a strange attempt of making the footballing community more inclusive. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to deny the fact that there's a certain something in the air when England are playing well. We made it to the Euro finals 2 years in a row, or 2 Euros in a row, and the UK was buzzing. People were so exciting, and the same that we're experiencing right now with England making it through to the semis. However, if unification is reserved only for when we're winning and succeeding at such a high level, I'm not entirely convinced that we can say that sport unites us if we're not there for the lows as well. One thing I will say, however, which I'm not sure is an outlier, but Arsenal winning the Prem after 22 years created an insane sense of unity, and I wonder if it has anything to do with the demographic and the makeup of the Arsenal fan base. Obviously, Arsenal have a long history of being a predominantly black club, with Arsene Wenger notoriously signing players from the diaspora or black British players, and then being the first ever Prem team to have 9 black players in their starting 11. And then on top of that, the Arsenal women's fan base is responsible for, I think it's 45% of the women's Super League ticket sales, and I do think that that speaks to the general consensus and the unity within the Arsenal fan base. And I'm not saying that Arsenal is like a monoracial club, however, the levels are a lot different to other clubs that we see in the Prem. Currently, as a society, I don't feel like we're at a place where we're intersectional enough for sport to truly unite us. It obviously needs to be noted this is coming from like a British and American perspective rather than a global global perspective, because this is just my opinion from what I know. But I don't think we're at a place where we're intersectional enough. So I think that sport can unite specific class groups together, and I think it can unite specific racial groups together, and I think it can unite women together, and I think it can separately unite men together. However, I truthfully don't think at the moment we can cross all of those intersections together and say that football unites us, because of the divisions that we're seeing so rampant in our world, and especially in the UK, where we have such a massive rise in the far right. You see an England flag out and you don't know whether that England flag is because they're a supporter of Tommy Robinson in the far right, or because they're a supporter of the England national team. So we're honestly in such a murky area at the moment. I think the sense of belonging that we feel when football is going well and England are winning is almost superficial, and I think that it doesn't transcend beyond the black players performing well. And I think if they were to mess up in a penalty, the narratives and the undertones of the country would shift expeditiously, like we've seen in previous tournaments. And so in that case, it feels like an almost surface level feeling of belonging and unification. We obviously also see this on a global level as well with the FIFA World Cup, because football isn't truly uniting us, because countries can't have their fans or all of their specific sports teams or all of their physiotherapists visiting and supporting them, because the US has visa restrictions imposed on so many global south or third world countries, which then divides and isolates part of the world from enjoying something which should be unifying us all together. I think the reason that we're not able to cross into the different intersections for football to truly unite us is because colonial legacy still is so rife in the UK, and the same with the class divide, where the 1% are reaping the benefits by exploiting the working class and then pointing the finger at immigrants or black people or other marginalised groups in the UK. And that doesn't suddenly go away when the World Cup or the Euros goes around. It might get blanketed and pushed under the carpet for a second, but all it can take is one fuck up by an ethnic minority for the winds to change entirely. And another reason that I think that football unites us along specific lines rather than uniting the world or the country as a whole is because, for example, a group of white men in England shirts feel united, they feel linked together by a common cause, and they feel therefore comfortable enough to then hurl racist abuse at black people in the street or type it online and leave it in Instagram comments. And I'm not by any means saying that this is every white man in an England shirt. However, the fact that they feel comfortable enough in that group that this is a socially accepted thing that can happen, it essentially speaks to an us and them narrative which we're seeing in larger society as a whole, whether it's through immigration, class, race. The us versus them narrative is being pushed by the far right and also by social media algorithms as well, which then creates the us as white Englishmen who love the English football team versus black Brits or immigrants or the diaspora. And the question we need to be asking is, why do these groups of people feel comfortable enough to hurl racist abuse and act this way and promote their racist ideologies or their homophobic ideologies or their gender-based violence? Why do they feel comfortable enough doing this? Because they feel a strength in the group of numbers as they're all united under one front as an England football fan. CLR James said, sport cannot truly be understood unless placed within its proper, sophisticated context. Any analysis of the significance of society's culture and politics will remain incomplete until such analysis includes the cultural form that most moves the general population, not in print, but in the minds and the body. And football is seen as something which is inherently English and something that English people are so proud to support and proud to be involved in. I do think that football can one day end up uniting us. Football specifically intercepts fashion and culture and music and community values, and it dissipates tensions within specific groups if you're out kicking ball together. And I do think that football can be used as a tool to unite people. Anyway, the final verdict is football does not unite us intersectionally, but it creates belonging within specific groups. But one day football will and can be able to unite us.